Welcome to Gold Derby's Meet the Experts TV documentary panel. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with Prentice Penny, director and executive producer of Black Twitter, A People's History on Hulu. Prentice, I'm going to take a page right from your book. The documentary starts with you asking, what is Black Twitter? So I'm asking you, what is Black Twitter?
Black Twitter is, I think, the way I would describe it is the way a cookout happens digitally. It's a space, it's a weird thing where it's a public space, but it feels private. So it's a space I feel like where Black culture gets to be unapologetically themselves and drive culture in a way that they don't sometimes get to do in the same way in the real world, or at least it didn't then.
And we know you as a man behind a lot of great comedies from Scrubs, Brooklyn Nine-Nine to Insecure. So I understand Black Twitter came into your life while you were working on Insecure. So talk about that. And like, when did you think, we have to make a documentary about this? This is a movement that we have to talk about.
Yeah, I had just finished filming Insecure. I was leaving HBO to go to my deal under at Onyx. And one, I didn't know what I wanted to do next. Two, I knew I had just done a comedy at a very high level. And I knew I kind of wanted whatever I did next not to be immediately compared to Insecure, which I just didn't feel that would be right. And I'm sure whatever I do will inevitably be, but in my mind at that time, the logic made sense. But I also wanted to be scared again creatively. Like when Insecure came on, there wasn't a show like that. That was like a new thing we were trying to do. And so I remember that feeling of being scared and nervous and like, is this gonna work? And I like that creative thing again. And this came across my lap and I initially said no, because I was like, I don't do this. But that was all the reason why, right? I was scared. I was nervous. I was like, what if I fail doing something like this? And that was scary. And that was charging me creatively. And then I thought, well, if I could do it my way, what would I do? And I started to think about all the ways that I would do something. And Spike Lee is one of my favorite filmmakers. And I thought about the way that obviously he does narrative, but he had done, When the Levees Break, he had done Four Little Girls. He had done the Off the Wall doc about Michael Jackson's album. And so it just was exciting now. And so that's really how it came across to me. And then reading the article, I was just like, I participate in Black Twitter. I recognized its impact on the world. It reminded me of the way my mother talked about the civil rights movement in the 60s. And that was sort of like, if I could do anything that's like documents that was special. I didn't realize it'd be so prophetic about why we were documenting it because at the time Elon hadn't bought the platform yet.
Yeah. And why was it Twitter? What was it about that social media platform that brought strangers together in this really, it created this community where people could share humor, political views, and eventually led to movements like Lives Matter, and even the election of Joe Biden was really, helped along by Black Twitter in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's ways in which the platform specifically was helpful. It was different than Facebook, where Facebook was kind of like, come meet your friends. So you're kind of getting people that think like you exactly. Whereas Twitter to me was more, its foundational was like, it could be lots of different things. They were never really sure what the platform should fully be. And it was a place to come meet strangers. Right. And so kind of like forming a community. Right. So if I could be Black, the other guy could be white, but if we're both Laker fans, we could follow someone who talks about the Lakers, right? And so you were kind of meeting people who thought like you, but also didn't fully think like you either, right? And you could pop and meet new people. And so I think for that way, the platform took the inverse approach to Facebook, which allowed you to hear other points of view that may not be your own. But then I think the way that Black Twitter used it specifically is the way that I think we do a lot of things in the barbershops or on the stoop, or we talk about it being like a digital stoop, right? Where you can talk about things that are super funny, right? And get jokes off, and you can also have deep political conversations. And Black culture is always doing one or two or three or four of those things. And that was just a way that we replicated it on the platform, was just, again, being ourselves and doing what we do, when we're sort of in real life, but doing it in a public digital space, but still feeling like, but nobody knows what we're talking about here anyway, right? And so that was, again, we had those conversations for real. We were just having them now here on Twitter.
Well, and it is funny, and people need to check it out because you've got all the famous Karens, the memes, the gifs. crying Michael Jordan is in there.
Mhm.
And one of my favorite stories, though, is how Black Twitter really took the TV show Scandal to a new level. In this age of streaming, this TV show was appointment viewing, and you had to watch live or you were going to miss all the incredible Black Twitter discussion. And talk about how Scandal impacted Twitter and how Black Twitter really impacted Scandal as a successful TV series.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny now we think about like live tweeting as just like a thing that we just roll out as part of a marketing thing, but it didn't exist before Scandal. You know what I mean? Twitter was just like, showing support for, I think Kerry Washington was like the first Black woman as a lead since like, Diane Carroll and Julia in like the 70s, so it was just like one, we're showing up for Chandra Rhimes, who had broad Grey's Anatomy. Now we're showing up for Kerry Washington and wanting to push that over. And I think, one of the things we talk about in the doc is that the ratings for Scandal were okay, but it really was when Black Twitter was having, you know, jokes and fun conversations and real conversations about interracial dating and what does this look like from this perspective of a Black woman and a white man. And so there were all the comedic parts, there were all the serious parts, and all of that though was driving conversation, which inevitably people wanted to be a part of the Twitter conversation. So as a result, nobody wanted to DVR it. Everybody wanted to watch it live because you wanted to watch it live so you could have this secondary conversation in Black Twitter. And as a result, it just kept driving the ratings up and up and up and up and up. So it was kind of having this sort of like ecosystem payoff.
Yeah, and I remember the cast would get very involved as well. I mean, Kerry
Yeah,
Washington was on there going,
sure.
um, the editing I love in this docuseries as well, because you have the memes and the GIFs throughout. Like people sort of like they're popping up as you're doing the interviews. How difficult was it to just comb through all of that, decide what you wanted to use, and then edit all of those in so brilliantly? Because it's so funny.
Thank you. Yeah, the initial challenge, and I think this was the hardest part about me agreeing to come on board, was I was like, well, one, what is the story, right? It can't just be what the article is. And if you can Google it, that's not a story, that's just information, right? But then two, I was like, what is this going to look like, right? I didn't want it to feel like this sort of very observational doc that you could normally kind of see. I wanted the viewer to feel what it feels like to be on Black Twitter, right? And so I wanted the visual style of that to exist. So having tweets come across themselves, starting on one person's avatar, scrolling down past tweets, and then picking up somebody else to comment on that, then putting a GIF or a meme to punctuate that point is how Black Twitter is. Sometimes it's just pictures, right? Which is how we're having a conversation. And so for me, I wanted it to have a visual language. And I think coming from narrative, it made me want to make sure the doc had a visual style, a visual language we were playing. And even the sets, I really wanted the sets to be reflective of where people engage on Black Twitter. So whether the set's a barbershop, a subway, a school, a beauty salon, a shoe store, the park, we really were specific. I think we had like 30 sets, which for a doc, I know like never happens, but I needed it visually to feel like Black Twitter as much as possible. And so that was so once we had that, then it was the painstaking process of what GIF punctuates this the most. And certain ones I knew in my mind, like I wanted it to be like in the opening, where James Harden scratching his head and the Black kids, like I knew like because I use them. So that was the other thing. It's like, it's fun when you use them because you're like, oh, we could use this one here, use this one there. But it was a lot. That and the graphics were a lot to comb through for sure.
Well, it's so much fun. It's a three-part series, and it takes you really from the beginning, where it's all fun and games, to more cultural movements, the murder of Trayvon Martin, George Floyd. It gets very serious, and it really takes us through all of those emotions. And Prentice, congratulations on this documentary.
Thank
It's
you.
streaming on Hulu, and good luck to you this Emmy season.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Welcome to Gold Derby's Meet the Experts TV documentary panel. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with Amanda McBain, director and producer of Girl State on Apple TV+. Amanda, you filmed Boy State in 2020, which went on to win an Emmy. And now you have Girl State, which follows 500 adolescent girls from all across Missouri as they come together for this week-long immersion in democracy to create their own government. How quickly after filming Boy State were you like, all right, we need to do Girl State next?
Well, it's actually the first thing we thought of. We wanted to do Girls State, and we actually were talking to Texas Girls State at the time that we were also talking to Texas Boys State. So we always knew we were going to do it. It didn't work out with the Girl State there at that time, but, and for various reasons, we did Boy State, but we always knew we wanted to do it. It was really about when, where, but not why. So yeah, it was always on our mind.
And this program has taken place in every state since like the 40s, I believe. So in Boy State, like you said, you filmed in Texas. In Girl State, you do film in Missouri. Why did you choose that state for this project?
I think we wanted to get out of Texas. And for a minute there, we sort of auditioned a number of states across the country. And the first place we went was California. We thought we did the big red state. What happens if we did the big blue state? But what we really needed more fundamentally than the politics of the state was a big program. So some of these programs are smaller than others. We needed a big, diverse program. And Missouri has a giant, well-run program, and the leadership there are game for the kind of filmmaking that we wanted to do, and not every program leadership was. But also, to go back to the politics of the state, Missouri is fascinating. It's sort of emblematic of a lot of states in our country. It's not a battleground state, but it does have a really interesting mix of pretty liberal, very liberal politicians, and then very, very conservative ones. And the kids reflect that. And that's what we needed also in what we were going to film, is a diversity of politics.
How blind do you go into filming, like in terms of what you learn when you get there? Because one of the big things that struck me were the inequalities between what Boy State has become and what Girl State is, including about a $400,000 difference in funding, at least in Missouri. I mean, what sort of things like that struck you as you were going through this process?
Well, I mean, I'll rewind a little bit and just say we were pretty terrified to make this film because so much had worked with Boy State, and we'd explored so much of what we wanted to explore about how kids were processing this very polarized time that our country's going through politically. So what was going to be new about a Girl State film? Would it just be the same film starring girls? And I think part of what I wanted to explore for sure, or we, Jesse, my husband and I are filmmakers together, was personal, but we have two teenage girls, and we know some of what girls, at least teenage girls and women, face that men don't. And what I didn't know, though, was the degree to which the programs really are unequal. So there's a certain amount of, you'll see in the film, there's a certain amount of internalized stuff that I was expecting, like girls tend to be more perfectionistic, girls tend to be more polite, and like the certain internalizations of stuff that I was interested in exploring. How would that play out in creating a new democracy? But what I hadn't expected is the way that these programs are run are very different. And that was a surprise. And part of it is because they're funded differently, which I shouldn't be surprised about, but it did feel like kind of old stuff that you'd hope we'd come past, like Title IX or whatever else. It just felt a little bit, a lot about these programs have a little bit of a old-fashioned quality to them. They're trying to reach forward, and there's a lot that I love about them, and but some of it is stuck in the past a bit.
Well, another thing that sort of landed in your lap as filmmakers is this Girl State Week happened to be taking place as the US Supreme Court was making their judgment on Roe v. Wade. So that really became center of mind to a lot of these girls who had very opposing viewpoints on abortion. And it was really fascinating to watch that among teenage girls who were on both sides of the issue. One thing that it seemed they all sort of agreed on, though, was like, why are men making these decisions? It seemed like both the pro-choice and pro-life girls all came to that conclusion. What was that atmosphere like as it started circulating? Because it was circulating that the news had been leaked that they were going to overturn Roe v. Wade. So what was that energy like while you were there?
Um, that was also one of the reasons we wanted to make this film. The Girl State program builds the third branch of government. So we knew we were going to see an all-female Supreme Court hear a case that was being argued by women in front of a room full of women. And, you don't ever know, you kind of hope that that case they're going to hear will be relevant to what's going on in the country, at large. And that is generally how it works with these programs. They kind of, the real world sort of trickles in and filters in. And it's of course, something as momentous as the overturning of Roe v. Wade is going to be top of mind. We didn't know there was going to be a leaked opinion. I don't know if that's ever happened before. So that really happened like a couple days before these girls convened for session. So it wasn't just top of mind. It was really part of every conversation. You see these girls at lunch tables having the conversation because that's what they came here to do, is talk with each other about hot button, but also very personal political questions. Going back to the program, though, they were prevented from actually talking about politics sort of on stage or in these big set piece moments. So we're happening only in these lunch table conversations. That frustration, at least with the girls we followed, were very ambitious, very knowledgeable, and also in Missouri, very worked up about this issue because it effectively rendered Missouri, because it was a trigger law state, you could not, it would be illegal, 1 week after the case became official. So they were very, very, very activated to have this conversation. And so eventually when the training wheels kind of came off the bike, they started really having this conversation, building a Supreme Court, and then hearing a Supreme Court case, which was fascinating to watch them at least take ownership of this conversation for a brief moment amongst themselves.
And it's fun to watch the relationships develop. I love the friendship between Nisha and Brooke, because these two are unlikely friends. Nisha was very serious and shy. Brooke was outgoing, and they somehow bonded at Girl State and then got pitted against each other for one position on the Supreme Court. Talk about following that friendship dynamic and how you decide, which subjects you're going to follow, because there's 500 girls here. You can't follow everyone.
Wait, it's critical that we find who we're going to follow way in advance of the event getting started, because once it gets going, it's light speed. I made up a word. I call it female strum, because it's just total intense chaos. And unless we're tethered to certain people, we'll just get lost. So we spent about 6 months finding the 7 fantastic, and very different from each other kids we were going to follow. Nisha is, extremely smart and, but was very nervous about going into this space because of, she was just worried she wasn't going to be able to navigate the social pieces of things. So for her preparation to go to this event, it was not like learning up on any kind of case law or anything. She watched Legally Blonde, which I thought was hilarious because what ended up happening, and we did not make this happen, I promise, but who she meets and literally is competing against is the real life embodiment of Elle Woods. Just this,
Yes.
she's the head cheerleader. She's a fantastic girl, like knows her stuff, and is incredibly skilled at socializing. And so knows everybody in camp within like 2 minutes. So that was a really fascinating, I guess, conjured her, but there she was. And that became the dynamic they had to work out.
Yeah. And Emily and Faith, these other two, are both running for governor. They're both very ambitious, very different personalities. Faith is a people pleaser, or Emily's the people pleaser, and she just wants to meet everyone. She goes through some very awkward moments trying to make conversation, and Faith doesn't really care what anyone thinks of her. She's just all about like, just look at my politics, look at my issues. What was fascinating about that is that they both then go to like this to give their speeches, and they're kind of overshadowed by someone who just goes up there with no prompter and gives this fiery, passionate speech. What was that like to watch play out? Because to me, that personified what politics is. It's not about like your policy, it's about your ability to rally and inspire. So we sort of saw that play out in Girl State.
I find those conventions really exciting because you just don't know what's going to happen, and there's always going to be a wild card. You hope actually in documentary that someone surprises you. I was a bit surprised at Emily's. I mean, I don't want to spoil it for anybody who is going to watch the movie, but like I was hoping to be surprised, and I really was by the whole event. And like Boy State, where we had a kid who didn't know he could give a speech, and he stood up on stage, and it was like you just watched someone literally find their voice. And that is very exciting to watch, particularly in young people who are just kind of finding their footing. All of these people are incredibly smart. It's just true. It's true. For that position, to be a governor, you have to be able to electrify a room. and it's almost like you're a musician on stage. And some people got it and some people don't. And that doesn't mean they shouldn't go into politics. In fact, Faith, who's she's probably going to be a congresswoman within the next 5 years. She's just that smart, that dedicated, and that knowledgeable about policy. So she's that person. And then there's other people who are behind, the sort of the schemers. Those people are important too.
Well, it's fascinating to watch. Anyone who loved Boy State will love Girl State, and I can also say it's a very different documentary. So don't feel like if you've seen one, you've seen them all. This is really its own thing, and it's equally as well done. So Amanda, congratulations! Thank you for joining our TV documentary panel, and good luck this Emmy season. Girl State also, by the way, is streaming on Apple TV+.
Thanks, Em.
Welcome to Gold Derby and our Meet the Experts TV documentary panel. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with Galila Bekele, writer, producer, and co-director of Maxine's Baby, the Tyler Perry story on Amazon Prime Video. Galila, Tyler's films all begin with Tyler Perry, but this film begins with Maxine, his mother. So what led to that? I know there's a line he says when you ask, "Who are you?" and he says, "Maxine's Baby." But at one point were you like, that's the line, that's the title?
I mean, that's a moment that most documentarian wishes for, right? That beautiful, honest, selfless answers that lead you to a core of who people are, right? And we've sort of, to kind of take it back a little bit, it's been a 10-year process of filming and following this man. And I think 3 years into it, I realized this was not a story about a celebrity. It's about the origin of where this man comes from. And more, the heart and soul of who he is his mother became more and more revealing. So when he gave us that, lovely moment, Maxine's Baby, was just like the icing on the cake.
I mean, well, it really takes us from the trauma he had suffering as a child from abuse, growing up poor, and going on to become one of the biggest entertainment moguls in Hollywood. And he also happens to be the father of your son. So, that's complicated. How do you present this idea to him? I want to make a documentary about your life. And how receptive was he to you about that idea?
Yeah, well, initially it wasn't for the purpose of making a documentary. I was working on another doc that was shooting in my homeland, Ethiopia, and it had its own challenges of shooting in rural parts of the world. But I did notice something special was happening. I've had for many years a front row seat and the privilege of watching this man design his dream and take chances constantly. And when, he acquired Fort McPherson Army Base and the idea of turning it into a major film studio, I've never heard of anything like that before. So naturally, when you're a filmmaker, you pick up a camera and want to document this moment. And it was for a purpose of archive. I am not American by birth. I am American. I live here. I love this country, but I also know the disproportionate side of the available archive of this country's history. And a huge chunk of the African-American contribution is missing. So I wanted to make sure that this moment wasn't missed. And also, I think when we look at people like Tyler who've achieved so much, we know a little bit of the beginning, which is like the origin story, but the middle is missing, and then you know where they are now. And for people who sort of want to follow his footsteps or just don't even understand where he comes from, I think it was important to kind of see all the glimpses of like who this man is and the complicated moments and the gray areas of like what makes and breaks your life and your dreams. So that's kind of how it started. And I think second year into it, I was like, okay, this could be a documentary. And I asked him, I said, I think it needs to be a documentary about you. And I didn't say it in a way that I wanted to do it. I never felt I was worthy or capable enough to tell this massive story. And he said, okay, great, why don't you make it? I was like, okay, let's see how this works. So I kind of had to approach it from like an anthropology kind of way of like dissecting not only about like where he is, but like his origin, where he comes from, his culture, why his work resonates so much with his fans, and also like the criticism as well. So I had to really make sure you create a space for polarity. If not, I knew it was gonna be a film that was fully told.
Yeah, you really do address the critics. I mean, even in the first few moments of the film, we see some of that, and then you dive deeper into it later. But even particularly from the Black community, that had strong criticism. I think it was like Spike Lee who had said something, compared it to buffoonery, some of Tyler Perry's work as Medea. But you know, as he's opening that studio, then we see that Spike Lee soundstage. So there's obviously some sort of relationship between the two, and respect, despite that sort of rocky start into Tyler's career.
Yeah, I think, you know, it would be unfair for me to comment on like the friendship or relationship or perspective of the two men. But what I do realize is that, you know, Killer Mike says it really beautifully when we interview him. And I think, can you be an artist and not represent your culture? Can you just be an artist and free to create? Right. And I think this is something most of us wrestle with when we do come from certain demographic of like, you're probably one of the few telling a story from your perspective. And I think you have these two incredible filmmakers who are uniquely have their own lens, right? And I think it was important to kind of have that conversation as well. And it was important for us that we didn't make anyone a villain or punish anyone for saying something wrong or celebrate someone, you know, better because they are giving Tyler an accolade, but really create a space of like, why are you disagreeing and why are you a fan? So these two were important for me, at least. And I think any filmmaker, any artist, you're going to have people who criticize your work and you're going to have people who appreciate and some who don't understand it. So it's an honest place to be, you know?
And you've got some great archival photos and videos of Maxine. So we get to meet her and see her and hear her voice. Talk about the discovery of that. And, you know, for knowing this man for so long, what surprised you about what you learned in this process?
Well, we stumbled on this mini DVs of Maxine. Armani and I, my co-director, just took a box of like archive footage from the studio without permission. And we had to convert it digitally to see what was on these tapes. And we just really thought it was old, you know, behind the scenes footage of Tyler working in House of Pain or some of like the early stages of his career. And it happened to be Maxine, and seeing her on, you know, on our edit screen and hearing her beautiful voice, you know, she's such her voice, I felt like I could have narrated the entire film. You know, we did make a cut with her narrating the entire film. I mean, it's just, her voice just melts like honey. And also as a mother, to hear her talk about her baby boy who endured so much pain with her, you know, and she's watched him actually live out some of his dreams. And I thought, this is so special, you know, even that moment where she goes on the stage after one of his plays and, you know, she says, he's given me all of my flowers while I'm still alive. And I thought that was such a universal feeling for every mother, for any parent. And also, I wanted to reveal more about New Orleans and where he comes from. And his cousin Lucky is also a big part of that. You know, he has such, I think the first time we interviewed him, I asked him, like, tell me about what makes people from New Orleans so special. And he's like, we put our money in our mouth, and he like opens his grill, you know, and he has this beautiful accent and swag, which made it so unique for me, at least. And him talking about his cousin and how they grew up, and also like the truth about what he endured as a child. And I think also seeing the abuse from a kid's perspective of like watching Tyler be abused by his the father figure, and also like his mom, which is sort of the inspiration behind Medea, was so amazing to hear that part being narrated and shared. And I understood a little bit more about Tyler's work and what inspired a lot of like his characters and his films and his projects.
Well, it's certainly worth watching. It gave me so much more of a perspective on Tyler, on who he is and what he actually really created and built. It's a fantastic piece for his legacy, and some really cool inside Hollywood bits in there for Medea, and how he flipped Hollywood on its head, and nobody knew who he was, and he's like, oh, I'm just gonna make 10 times more of the budget. Like, it was no problem for him. So there's so many great stories in this. Everyone go check it out on Amazon Prime Video. And Galila, thanks for joining our TV documentary panel today for Maxine's Baby, the Tyler Perry story, and good luck this Emmy season.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Welcome to Gold Derby and our Meet the Experts TV documentary panel. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson, here with Christopher Burke, producer and director of For Love and Life, No Ordinary campaign about one couple's fight to reclaim their future from an ALS diagnosis and create a movement for millions of others. Christopher, you have a personal relationship with Brian Wallach, the subject of this film. Prior to his diagnosis, you were classmates at Yale. So at what point do you decide you have to make some sort of documentary about him? And how did you begin that process?
Yeah, it actually started with a 60-second spot to help him launch his nonprofit back in 2019. You know, I think when somebody gets a diagnosis like this, friend or loved one, the natural inclination for any human with a pulse is to reach out and say, hey, I want to help, you know, and it's really tough. You feel like your hands are tied with something like ALS, where you've got the entirety of the neurodegenerative medical community working on this really hard problem and having a very difficult time making any breakthroughs. So what can one person do who knows nothing about medicine, right? Well, this is what I could do. And so I offered to help Brian. He took me up on that. And I hadn't seen him in years. You know, this was going on 20 years ago that we graduated college, and stayed in touch sporadically, but we were in different cities. And as soon as I got there and started filming with him, I realized that there was a lot more to this than could possibly be encapsulated in one short spot to help, a social media launch for his foundation. And since I was in Chicago anyway, I kept the cameras rolling, interviewed Brian, interviewed his wife, Sandra, met her for the first time on that day. And I left there thinking to myself, all right, this is something bigger. Didn't know exactly what just yet, but over the next couple of months, it became clear to me that this belonged in a full-fledged documentary form.
Where was he in his progression? Because you start the film and we see him on the beach in 2012 prior to the diagnosis, and then it cuts to 12 years later, and that's just like a real, like, it pulls you in to show like how fast this thing can work. Talk about those first moments and where he was in his diagnosis when you actually came to meet with him.
Yeah, and so that was early 2019, and at that point he had been diagnosed in 2017, and I had learned of it in 2018. So he was already, a reasonable length of time into it. But if you didn't know Brian and if you weren't looking for it, you wouldn't really have been able to tell. In January of 2019, there was a slight hitch in his voice and his step, but he was very much still the Brian that I knew from college. But given that ALS robs people of their ability to move and speak and eventually breathe, it was, let's just say, a little more urgent to capture as much as we possibly could from him at that time. And obviously, it's a tragic and horrible thing for anyone, but especially for somebody like Brian, who's such a gifted orator and speaker. I mean, he was a trial attorney, federal prosecutor, very, very smart guy, great with his words. And to see that taking away his physical ability to speak doesn't do anything to his mental sharpness, but taking his voice has been a really hard thing to watch, but also powerful that we were able to capture what we were.
Well, what's so fascinating about it is Brian he's just not the typical person that's diagnosed with something like this. I mean, as you said, he's a lawyer. He worked on President Obama's campaign. He's a former federal prosecutor. So he cries a little bit and then he gets to work. And he knows that getting things done require movements. And that changes decades of doctors saying you have Lou Gehrig's disease, which is what people call it in America, or ALS. So it's a death sentence, and they just sort of leave it at that. And he's like, "No, we're doing something." So,
Right.
what really set him apart, and how was he able to galvanize and organize people, and use that experience he had from political campaigns and put that to work here?
Yeah, Brian is just an amazing guy. Of course, I'm biased because he's an old friend, but if you watch what he's been able to accomplish, it has a lot to do with what I would call a very pragmatic and action-oriented form of optimism that drives him. He is not, he's not unrealistic about things. I guess he might say he is sometimes in terms of shooting for the moon, but the difference with him is that he will make a lofty pronouncement, a lofty goal, and then he'll back it up because he knows that you have to burn the calories and that you have to bring people together to do that. So it certainly started with him, but then immediately he had an amazing ally and partner in his wife, Sandra, who's an equal powerhouse force of nature to him. And then their whole network of political friends that they had from the campaigns. These were people who had cut their teeth as young adults, learning how to forge movements, as you said, and how to get things done, specifically in Washington. And so, it's the butt of a lot of jokes these days, Congress and the function of the US government. Nobody's really that thrilled with it. But one thing that's actually pretty cool in this film is that we show that it can work and it can be a thing of beauty. And there can be people reaching across the aisle to agree and come together to help on something that's just a completely universal cause, which is saving lives from a disease that can and does target anyone and everyone in this country and around the world for that matter.
Yeah, it was fast. One of the fascinating moments is when he testifies before Congress, and he is such a great speaker. And the way that he's able to deliver that message and get bipartisan support, I think they get like $80 million more a year in research or something like that. So, why did it take so many decades for like anything to happen?
I think one of the big things that I learned from Brian early in this process is that there's an awareness gap with ALS. And part of the reason that happens is because, unfortunately, the patients die so quickly. And I remember sitting in an Uber with him in DC, riding to one testimony or another, and he was explaining to me that ALS is diagnosed at roughly the same incidence as MS, multiple sclerosis, but there's a higher general awareness about MS because people are able to survive for longer. And partially that's the disease and partially it's the treatments that are available. But what happens with ALS is that, the typical life expectancy is no more than 2 to 5 years. And then oftentimes it's misdiagnosed. And so you've got a lot less time than that even. It financially and emotionally and physically drains not only the person who's suffering the disease, but the families too. And so historically what has happened, as I've learned from a lot of the advocates, is that families want to stay in the fight, but they can't. They've got to sort of somehow find a way to move on, and reliving that pain again and again of losing someone to this disease can be too much for a lot of people. And so what Brian and Sandra realized was really missing was this sense of movement building that could become sort of a snowball effect and become self-sustaining, not only in terms of federal funding and things like that, but of being there for one another. And these families and people being able to understand what others are going through and really galvanize and band together and support each other through this incredibly difficult thing.
What was it like to have President Obama sit down with you and have a conversation with him about this couple?
It was great. I mean, he rightly served as a large source of inspiration for Brian and Sandra in their early formative years. You know, those wide-eyed 20-year-olds working on the '08 campaign. And I was impressed but not surprised that he didn't need any cue cards or anything. He came in clearly having read the briefing and knew a lot about the issue. He's been following their story, and he remarked that he was really, he takes a lot of pride in his alumni, so to speak, going on and doing big things like this in the spirit of the hope and change that he originally ran on. And we had 30 minutes with him, and I made the choice to spend the last 10 minutes surprising Brian and Sandra with a FaceTime call because they weren't there. And that was one of the top moments of my life, being able to facilitate that and watching them talk and joke back and forth. And President Obama, jokingly taking credit for their entire relationship because they had met on his campaign, and then asking why at least one of their kids wasn't named Barack. But so it was good. He had a lot of love for them and a lot of investment in seeing this succeed.
And we see so much of the failures of the healthcare system and how that can be improved. But this is also really a love story between Brian and Sandra, and how great they are able to communicate. What was it like just watching that relationship evolve over the years as his health deteriorated? And, she remains strong, but we do see private moments where she breaks a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it took a incredible amount of vulnerability on their part to open up their lives to this. It's not a movie, it's their lives, and we're just documenting it. And it was hard, I would say equal parts beautiful and difficult, but probably a little more difficult than beautiful, because so many things are being lost all the time, whether it's them or some of the other families that we feature in the film. We definitely had a lot of laughs, Brian joking about her pulling the needle out of the wrong place when she's doing an IV drip for one of his drugs. I mean, you sort of have to laugh through some of this stuff because it's so difficult and painful. The laughter and the love keeps them going in the face of unbelievable odds. And for me, the challenge was really just to figure out a way to be there and to be a fly on the wall, as happens when you're trying to make a verite documentary, and capture real moments between the two of them that could then play a role in pushing the overall narrative forward. So it was definitely hard because I do have an emotional investment in their lives, with Brian being my old friend. But again, this is the way that I thought I could give back best, not just to them, but to anyone who's going through ALS or another neurodegenerative disease. And I've talked to a number of patients and families at a lot of the film festival screenings that we've done, and just had some amazing conversations and made a lot of friends and people who say that this film helped them to feel seen in a world where you often, as Brian puts it in the opening of the film, you feel like you've become the other, and people don't want to pay attention to you because it distracts them from their normal life. It's hard to look at. And so I stared this disease straight in the face for 4 years making this film. And I think we've come up with something that is a heartfelt record of what one couple did to face it down, and how they've been able to grow that into a movement that's having major positive ramifications.
Yeah, it's incredible and so moving, and you learn a lot too about the healthcare system and the improvements we can make. Thanks for joining our TV documentary panel. For Love and Life, No Ordinary campaign is streaming on Amazon Prime Video on May 28th. And good luck this Emmy season.
Thank you.
Welcome to Gold Derby's Meet the Experts TV documentary panel. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson, joined by Prentice Penny for Black Twitter, A People's History, Amanda McBain for Girl State, Galila Bekela for Maxine's Baby, The Tyler Perry Story, and Christopher Burke for Love and Life, No Ordinary campaign. Thank you all for joining me. I love the diversity of these projects. I laughed, I cried, I learned. It's political, it's Hollywood. There's a lot going on here. So since documentaries are all encompassing, I'd love to ask, each of you, starting with you, Prentice, as someone who comes from a lot of fictional comedies, what excites you about documentary filmmaking? Like, what really brought you into this field and said, I want to do that?
I think getting deeper into the thing that you're talking about. For me, obviously, when you're doing something fictional, you're trying to tell a story, whether it's in TV or movies. Mine has mostly been television, and you're trying to think about this character, and you're thinking about that character, and you're trying to progress the story. But you always know, like, you have to keep it moving in a certain way. And I'm someone who loves wormholes a lot. And so to be able to think that I think I know what the story is, and then to go deeper and deeper in a way that sometimes you're just not able to do just with the time and the budgets you have. When even, I know that sounds crazy coming from scripted, but you have a date in which you're trying to deliver something by, something has to air by a certain time. And doing this doc was the first time I had done something for 2.5 years of my life that was kind of pretty all-consuming of what I was working on. And so to be able to just get deeper, deeper, deeper into something where that's your only focus. I don't know, I just thought so many special things came out of that. Things I didn't think were the story became the story. Things I thought, oh, I think I know what this is. This isn't as interesting as this. And that's been my biggest love. I was like, man, I wish I wouldn't love this. There's not a ton of money in it to provide for my family, but the fulfillment out of it, I has been fulfilled almost as I've done anything else in my life. It's really been special.
And Amanda, how do you continue to find subjects you're passionate about in this world of endless topics? What catches your eye? And then, how long does it take to say, like, all right, I'm really gonna commit to this? Because once you're in, you're in.
Yeah, I think you have to be willing to spend at least 2 or 3 years of your life with those people. You're basically inviting them into your dinner table. I mean, and this is literal because I worked with my husband too, so we are constantly talking about this stuff. I think what Prentice said is true. Like, I really do want to be surprised. I'm really kind of learning still with every film. I think so. I can't really say what at any given moment is what I really want to be working on. But for sure, with these last 2 Girl State and Boy State films, I think the state of our country and the sort of division in our country was something we wanted to investigate, but we're so overwhelmed by the amount of media about, or particularly news media, and the sort of traumatized by it, really, the nastiness of politics. So I think we wanted to find some other way to get into talking about it and working on it. And then we had these children too. So it was sort of like, that one seemed like a no-brainer, even though neither of us knew about this program. I kind of read this silly article in the Washington Post at some point about how the Texas guys had seceded from the Union. That's what they had done that year in their legislation. We thought, well, that's funny, but it's also like, it's a little bit, like, what does it say? Where are we at? And I think that is what you start with, and then you sort of scratch that itch, and then hopefully you find people that, for me, is who will teach me something. And every single film I've made connections with people who are very, very different from me, who always end up teaching me a lot about myself, about my world, all of it. So that's the hope.
And Galila, what's it like for you? Like, what inspired you to really get into the documentary side of things? And also, what is it like to be a filmmaker making a film about a filmmaker? I mean, that's kind of that's an interesting dynamic.
Yes, it's nerve-wracking. How do you paint a painter, right? And show the piece afterwards. It's very hard. For me, documentaries changed my life. I'm a third world kid. I remember watching the film Hoop's Dream, although I've never been to America when I watched it, and I never played basketball, but it spoke to me in a way that you can come from certain circumstances and still dream and work hard. And it just really spoke to me the same way Senna, the documentary, spoke to me. And it also, like, it opened my mind that not everything has to be scripted to deserve a space of beautifully shot cinematic experience. And, with Tyler, I think, you can start a film with a loving gaze, but still hold a space for a nuanced kind of way of telling the story and really diving deep. And although I thought I've known him for many years, there's so much I didn't know. I think often our loved ones hold back information so we don't get traumatized by the story they're telling us or view them in a certain way. Or also, in this case, when you're talking to someone about abuse and trauma, you still have to go into it with a very soft approach. It's not natural to stick a camera and follow someone every day for 10 years. So even vulnerability with people that we know in all of our lives, the day they tell you, the landing pad has to feel soft, you know? And, you know, although this is a story about my, you know, the father of my child, he's still dreaming, he's still designing his imagination and making it come true. I was 4 months pregnant when I started filming him. Our son is 9, and he was old enough to ask his father, "Why do you work so hard, Papa?" Right? And it's also a story about 3 generations of 2 men and a little boy. Father, you know, the fatherhood aspect. You know, Tyler's experience from the father figure is so opposite to what he's giving his son. So like the question about how do we come with love in our heart, or is it taught? Like so many different questions. So to answer your question fully, documentaries reach so many people, films, art reach so many people. And as frivolous as it seems to be, talking about art at this moment with so much is going on in life, I do know sometimes these creative outlets is how we let the poison out, how we speak to each other. So that's why for me.
And Christopher, like Galila, you're making a film about someone that you know. So you've made plenty of documentaries. What first pulled you into that world of that having that interest to make documentary film? And then what is the biggest difference about making a film with the subject that you're very close to?
Yeah, I think, you know, the Prentice made a point earlier about wormholes or rabbit holes that we like to go down. And that's definitely the way I am. I've always been really inquisitive. I love just going really deep on stuff and figuring out all kinds of arcane details. But then with documentary, you also have to then sort of distill it down and figure out how to get it on screen in a way that people are going to watch, that's entertaining and engaging. So that's been a really fun challenge for me. And I just love that about this line of work. And in terms of this one specifically, my old friend asked for help and I showed up, and this is what I got. You know, I think sometimes we try to choose projects, but this one chose me more accurately. And I just felt like as soon as I looked at this, I couldn't look away. And there were a lot of really hard moments where it would be, you know, it would be tough enough no matter what, even if you sort of have like a little bit of journalistic detachment. But when this is a guy you've known for 20 years, and you know, there's a moment where Brian testifies in Congress, and then he comes out into the hallway and he breaks down crying. And I was just there with the camera walking backwards, hoping I didn't trip, and trying to capture the essence of what he was going through, when I really felt like I should be putting the camera down and giving him a hug, because as a human being, that's what you want to do. And we actually talked about it at the end of a really awkward, long walk down a hallway. And I said, "Hey, you know, I'm sorry. I feel like I shouldn't be shooting." And he looked at me through his tears and said, "No, you absolutely should be shooting. You're doing your job. I'm doing mine. That's why we're here." And it was really tough. And there were a lot of moments like that. But we're trying to capture something that can move the needle for people with actual life and death subject matter of neurodegenerative disease. And so there's going to be some hard moments, and you just kind of got to figure out how to get through those and come out the other side.
And just to maybe reverse the order a little bit, and Chris, stay with you. When you're working on this subject, documentaries, you don't have a script. You're not following a specific script. How do you know this is when I'm cutting? This is it. I have to stop. We have to put some sort of film out. And particularly when I'm thinking of your film, he goes and speaks at Congress, and that would have been great. But then he goes back. You couldn't have known he was going to go back. I mean, there's incredibly huge moments that you could have known were coming, and maybe more are coming. And so at some point you have to say, well, we have to stop. What is the most difficult part about that?
I mean, just what you said, you never know when to stop. And especially with something, in our case, a story of legislative and funding successes coming one after another at the federal level, while also a guy with ALS is fighting for his life and losing more and more physical ability every day. That was a really hard thing to figure out. And honestly, what the thing that the forcing mechanism for us to stop was that we needed to premiere at a film festival. So we did, and then luckily we had some epilogue cards that we've been able to update and that have been updated a little bit more for the release on Prime Video, that detail some more of the further successes that have happened. But I think one of the big lessons and messages that I'm trying to get out there with this film is the idea that, yes, they've had this great trajectory in a few years of making big changes in the landscape of ALS, but they are just getting started. Not just Brian and Sandra, but the entire community that continues to grow. And that's been a really amazing thing to witness. And yeah, in our case, it was just we had to stop. Otherwise, it would have been very tempting to keep going.
And Galila, for you, I mean, I think you followed him for about 10 years or something, which I'm sure he must have loved. But you could have gone on forever. I mean, he's still making history. He's still thankfully very much here. So at one point do you say, I mean, all right, this is the film we're gonna make for now anyway, regardless of where his legacy takes him from here.
Yeah, I mean, we thought we were finished when the grand opening of the Fort McPherson studio was, when it opened. We're like, okay, this is the finale, studio's open. And then a few months later, pandemic hit. So of course, Tyler being Tyler, he created a whole formula to kind of start production again. And also what was happening around Atlanta, all of these things. So you kind of intuitively continue. It's hard to say when to stop. The best way I can explain it, even with my past films, is there's an intuition that sort of kicks in that says, okay, this might be enough for now. There's always in the back of your mind, like going back to film even years later to kind of see for your own self what's happened, what impact, what's going on, what changes have happened. But I also realized that sometimes when you release something, it takes a life of its own. And I think about young people who are in similar circumstances, who come from similar backgrounds, or even people who are entrepreneurs, young people who want to start something, can see this film and be inspired by this man who created his own formula. Even looking at I didn't know the deal he made, the 1090, which set precedent for so many other TV shows that came after him. That itself is so inspiring. If I was an entrepreneur watching that, I would get a sort of like a boost of energy to keep going. I also think about him looking at his life, and like sometimes we don't look at what we've done, we just keep going, right? And kind of taking a step back and saying, okay, this is what I've done, what could I change? So again, it could have been a film we continued for 20 years. I am one of those crazy people who will follow someone for 10, 12 years and find out what life has come to, because that's how life is. And I think documentary is so hard to have a deadline and set date, and having the privilege of time also helps you kind of reveal more of what the story is.
Well, Amanda, for you have a little bit different of a situation because you do have a finite time. You have to get the right shots in a week that you're allowed to be there for Girls State. So what is that pressure like? And then how long do you spend after that, sort of doing, wrap up interviews and before you're able to say you're ready to finish this film?
I mean, I kind of liked that. Having the limitations was freeing in a lot of ways. We've made longitudinal films, and it's true. I mean, their lives keep going. So maybe there should be some film of someone's life that really is Truman Show beginning to end. I mean, I feel that impulse each time. So it was really nice to have the kind of guardrails of. That being said, we also had the pressure of, I've been on fiction sets too, that you have this to get your movie. And what matters then for us is finding the right people to follow going into that event, casting properly, right? because gosh, you don't want to go through that event and think you've cast wrong. Because we needed to find kids who are going to do well in the program. So they had to be smart and politically savvy and passionate and the whole thing, but then also vulnerable enough to share themselves with the screen. And for a 17-year-old, that's a lot to ask of somebody. So we spent a long time finding the right people to follow. And then you cross your fingers and hope something good happens and that you're there. So we have this 30-person crew to be, be sure we're there for the moments that matter. But yeah, the high pressure was kind of fun, scary, terrifying, awesome. I love it.
And Prentice, how about you? How do you know when to call it quits? And then how did you decide this is going to be 3 episodes?
Well, we thought it would be 3 episodes. I didn't know at first. The article was actually in 3 episodes, but the article was written in 2021. So the article stopped at January 6th. None of the other things had happened. We didn't start filming, we were prepping, but we didn't start filming it until around March of last year. So much had been, changing on the platform, obviously. But for me, I didn't know what the story was going to be. And it really was, as I saw the article being laid out, I was like, what's the narrative, right? It's this sort of weird amorphous thing. So it really came down to, as I kept reading it, it felt like a coming of age story, which I go as a filmmaker, I'm like, as a 3-act structure, I understand that. And I understand that there are these fun early days of what we would often reference Star Wars as like our reference points, the original Star Wars, not the other stuff. But we'd reference, New Hope is like Luke is new. He doesn't really know anything about the Force. He's like learns what a Jedi is. He learns what this is. And then sort of the main adult thing that happens to him is Obi-Wan gets killed. And for us, that was Trayvon Martin. It's like Black Twitter's having this fun time and we're live tweeting and having all these fun. And then Trayvon happens and it takes Black Twitter into more adult conversations, more adult things as Empire and obviously eventually, stepping into, Black Twitter, just like we talked about Luke, stepping into their own power and responsibility and their own strength, right? And we didn't know we'd have an emperor like Elon Musk at the time, who was sort of the final boss that Black Twitter would have to go up against. But in terms of knowing when things are done, it was tricky because Elon bought the platform right in the middle of us shooting interviews. So we're having to now adjust to well, how does this change the story? Who do we need to talk to now? And it didn't change the coming of age story. That was, but it had you're watching him dismantle the platform in real time, fire people, hate speech goes up. He lets certain people back on the platform. He's dismantling it. And we have to now kind of start to figure out, again, how does that affect our story? Who do we need to talk to? And we were, really grabbing so many things up in it'd be like every week as we're in post, trying to color the film. He does this now, he does that now. At a certain point, you're just like, okay, we just have to end it because, we just kept waiting. Is Twitter really about to close up shop? That was a real thing we were also just holding for. Is this platform literally about to end? And one of the things that we weren't able to get in that I was like, I wish we could have got this in was the EU was banning the platform as a part of all of its hate speech. And they were just like, we're no longer going to necessarily we're going to put more guardrails in and really decide if X will even exist in the EU. And that was a thing that I was like, man, if that's an interesting thing, because that takes a lot of things into a whole different area. And obviously we've seen the way TikTok is going in front of Congress and all these other things, but it really was we got to turn the film in, guys, as a deadline, but we probably could have kept going. But yeah, that was really weird, watching the platform literally be changed in real time.
Well, I could keep going too, but we have to turn this in. And I want to thank each of you. I mean, what a great year for documentary films. I want to thank Prentice Penny of Black Twitter, Amanda McBain of Girl State, Gilly Labakella of Maxine's Baby, The Tyler Perry Story, and Christopher Burke of For Love and Life, No Ordinary Campaign. Thanks to each of you for joining our TV documentary panel today.
Thank you.
Thank you.